I want to pay tribute, and I have paid tribute, and I will continue to pay tribute to a woman named Jean Sachs, Sacks. And she was a name at this time, there was a legend in journals publishing. And she was the head of the journals division at the University of Chicago Press. And I want to pay tribute too to the University of Chicago Press because there was feminist studies and there were other women's studies journals. But I had the good fortune of having an established press behind me, and I will never be able sufficiently to express my gratitude for that. So Jean was manager of the journals division. She was a reentry woman. She was quite funny about what she called her suburban housewife period. She was an English major from the University of Chicago and then the suburban housewife period. She had married a fabled English professor at the University of Chicago. He was a widower. She was a divorcee, Sheldon Sachs. He had started with Wayne Booth and Arthur Heiserman an incredibly good journal called Critical Inquiry. And Jean said, we've got to do something for women now. So it was her idea. Wow. After CI was launched, it was her idea that they would do something for women. So she set out to find an editor. And she came to Barnard for something that I had a little hand in inventing called the Scholar and the Feminist Conference. And I had taught the first course in Black literature at Barnard College. And then I taught the first Women in Literature course at Barnard College. And none of this was particularly helpful for getting tenure, but thanks to the president of Barnard, a woman named Martha Peterson, I had just barely gotten tenure. I think Jean had asked Carolyn Heilbrunn if she wanted to edit the journal, and Carolyn said, I don't think so. So Jean came into the lunchroom of Scholar and the Feminist and started to talk to me. And we had a terrific time. We had a terrific conversation. I was filled with vinegar and hopefulness. And then she checked me out. She checked me out with two people at Barnard who went on to have really notable careers. Donna Shalala and Patricia Graham, who went on to be dean of the Harvard School of Education. Right. Now, according to what I heard, and this could just be urban myth, lunchroom myth, there was one question. Does she understand anything about social science? And they both said, well, she's good at charts and graphs, of course. It's fine. She'll be fine. She's not one of these, narrow, philologically, all due respect minded humanists. So Jean and I continued to talk. And then she smoked, both she and Shelley smoked and smoked and smoked, and she was smoking away. And she said, you want to try being found in it, try starting this? And there was no question. I had just been offered the most glorious possible future. It was a tremendous gift from the goddess. And so my jobs then, no computers, everything was done on electronic typewriter. My jobs then were to find an editorial staff, Domna Stanton to do international, Joan Burstein to do book reviews, and one was from education. I was always looking for balance. Domna was from French. So we did a skeleton staff. I made the decision that we would have an editorial board as diverse as possible. And it was very important that we have men, male contributors, male members, and then an advisory board and an international group. So then I sat in a little shack with an outdoor shower on the North Fork of Long Island and wrote up a mission statement, and typing them myself, sent out letters of invitation to these various boards. And then I won't say it was like a dream because that's just gobbledygook. but it was almost like a dream. The table of contents came to me, and articles, review essays, archives, reviews, no poetry. We were to be as serious could be. The name gave us a hard time. We thought of, believe it or not, Pharos, Pharos, lighthouse, until one of us said that's a tad phallic. Well, it was signs, because there was, of course, the idea of what is a sign. And I love the idea of a sign is pointing to the future.
Yeah.
A roadmap. And there was also, of course, for the semiologists among us, there was what could a sign mean. But I love the idea of pointing. And so all this went to the University of Chicago Press, this package. And again, it's not only Gene Sachs, Morris Phillipson was a very forward-looking publisher of the press. And they approved it. And we had a budget. I had great support from Martha Peterson. The president after that, not so much. And indeed, I had to file a complaint that I would not be given some time off in order to edit signs. The Ford Foundation was helpful. You know, the legendary Miriam Chamberlain, Eleanor Barber, they were very helpful. And there was lots of support. I don't mean just to say there was one, shall we say, uncertain president about the meaning of all this. We started off in one room. For those of you who will be watching or listening, one room in Barnard Hall. And I had a one-room office on the 4th floor of Barnard Hall. So there we were. And among the editorial assistants we had was a young woman, young undergraduate of the greatest sophistication, named Martha Nelson, who went on to found In Style. It was very serious. There were 2 desks with electric typewriters. We were as low-tech could be, given the fact that typewriters existed. And it was superb fun because there was so much that could be done. Of course, there was fighting and carrying on and jealousy and fretfulness. You know, of course there was. There was so much to be done. And we were there when there were just enough women in the academy then. There were just enough. I had barely gotten tenure. So there were just enough women who had tenure. And of course there was opposition. Of course there was opposition. What is this? We were very careful. And I know, Carla, that in some of the things that has been written in the new signs, absolutely correct. You track the shift from study of women in cultural society. Then in 86, we bring in gender, and then feminism comes in. But we were going to be utterly serious, and no one could refute the impeccability of the work that was being done. Domna was a brilliantly skilled editor. We all worked on editing. And I have to, in fact, I've just put it up on the Critical Inquiry website that is doing comments on the 50th anniversary of Critical Inquiry. Because Shelley and Jean and I were friends. And I look back at what Shelley wrote about Critical Inquiry and what it would do, and there was an overlap. Inquiry, methodological breadth, curiosity, interdisciplinarity, the combination of the new with some traditions that were still valuable, praise ye footnotes, and to be in New York City, because a lot of international visitors would come through. And I remember Marissa Navarro coming up to the signs office. Of course, not just Gene Sachs, everybody was smoking. And people came to us with wonderful ideas, like being able to do the papers from the Wellesley Conference on Women and National Development. We sent people, Hannah Papanek, who was at BU, God bless her. We sent her to Mexico City. We covered all the UN conferences. The life of the mind is changing. The life of the heart is changing. We are connected to the women's movement, but the university has its own place as well. And we can get to that when we talk about the future. And what a gift it was. We knew there were certain things we had to do. Curiosity, inquiry, range, and rigor. Again, as I said, we knew it had to be interdisciplinary. We had to have men involved. So Paul Lauder, of course, was on the editorial board. I mean, the science grew more and more global, but we knew that there was a world out there. It was the world of our minds, and it was the globe that we inhabit. And we knew there was work that had to be done. And it was work in terms of, to quote Adrienne Rich, the reconstruction of the mind. It had to be done as well as possible. Now, of course, as you know, Carla, it was, oh, and there's no women's style in this. They're not, where is the female sensibility? I mean, we published Elaine Sixou. We published Julia Kristeva. Women's sensibility, women's sensibility. I said, there is something that women do as well as anybody, and men can do. And that is to think. And I really, looking back at it, yes, habits of thought have gender, ideologies of thought have gender. The mind in action has very little gender, although it may work on gender topics. So call me the founding editor who still was wrapped in the toga of the Enlightenment. I do believe there is such a thing. It's riddled and rattled with emotion, of course. It's riddled and rattled with tradition and, to take a William James word, habit. But the mind in action is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But there were conferences and caucuses throughout the disciplines. Our international correspondents were very helpful. The rudimentary infrastructure of women's studies was very, very helpful. I did ask a lot of people to do things. I mean, our first review essays were, would you please do the review essay, these brilliant review essays. But the article that caught everybody's attention, and it just came over the transom, though we knew the author. And this, of course, was Carol Smith Rosenberg, The Female World of Love and Ritual. I mean, the old networks had their stupidities. She said, well, I think it was the American Historical Review that had turned it down, and would we like to take a look at it? And there were some charts in it that her daughter Leah, who was then, 10 or 11, something like that, Leah had drawn them. They were in pencil. We had to sort of slightly, put them in shape. And so we looked and said, all right, this is our lead article. Yeah. And again, impeccably done. And the combination of impeccability and imagination. So when people got their black issues, the black cover issues, and they opened it up and they saw the list of all the people there, then they opened it up and there were the review essays that were so valuable. But The Female World of Love and Ritual. And so thank you, Carol, thank you. So that's, but there was asking, for example, I did ask Elizabeth Hardwick to write something. I did ask Elizabeth Janeway, Susan Sontag, will you please come on the advisory board? And people were, and here New York was, again, New York was a really helpful place. It might have been San Francisco, it might have been, but New York was in such a crossroads, though I was terribly anxious. And despite Jean and the support, the incredible support. And the first issue was about to come out, and we corrected the galleys, and we were demon proofreaders. I was walking up and down some corridor in Barnard College, and I had a great friend named Mary Mothersill, who was a philosopher, who is now dead. And Mary, I said, I'm really worried. Oh, yeah. She said, oh, come on, it's going to be all right. And one of the moments was in Chicago. And this is, of course, a perhaps common story. I was in the ladies' room, and Jean Sachs opened the door and stuck her head in and said, we're in the black. Meaning we were making money. That was our third issue. I will tell you one story about loyalty. It wasn't just, how fabo we were. That if we lost a subscriber, I would send out a handwritten note. Say, why? Please come back. And if it was a subscriber that would write something nice, of course they would get a handwritten note. It was the loyalty of our subscribers. It was the loyalty of the field. Yeah. We were buoyed by the field. And I heard a story about a woman, and I dropped her a note, of course, very recently, in the last couple of months. And she was moving into assisted living, not that she needed the medical facilities at that point, but, she was planning her life. And she had to let go of most of her books to move into a small apartment. And one of the texts she had taken was Signs, Volume 1, Number 1. And what greater proof of loyalty and of the field supporting us. And again, of the fields having all this incredible talent. Well, we knew that from what people said, someone who said, it landed on my table, and I knew that the academic life here was going to be different. We were just busy getting out the issues. Yeah. And we were getting a lot of criticism, of course, in the old guard and the old fuddy-duddies, and people again on the other side who said, oh, I don't see a female sensibility here. This is just old-fashioned methods. But you know what it's like. You've got 4 issues a year, many submissions that you have to judge fairly. And then you figure out what should be the thematic. Where's the field going? You're kind of too busy to be haughty. There were more subscriptions than they expected. And we did get grants. I went out and got grants for special issues, for example. And again, in the long list, the honor roll of patron saints, the Ford Foundation, I mentioned it before. And then I went the Lilly Foundation because I got a little tip that it was near the end of the budget year and there was a tiny bit left. So I picked up the phone. Would you mind? Would you like to think of this?
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I'll take a crumb. I'd rather have a crumb than an empty plate.
That's brilliant.
I'm restless, but there's certain consistencies. The feminism is certainly been a consistency. The bossiness has been consistent. And science was crucial. I don't know. Perhaps what was crucial too was getting tenure, which again, thanks to Martha Peterson, I barely got tenure. Another question is, why did we give it up? Elizabeth Hardwick, she said, look at the New York Review of Books, all great journals, they have one editor. And I said, the field is different. Field is really different. And I think Jean Sachs was very annoyed with me too, because it was a lot of work to send it out to Stanford. And we had such a lovely relationship. I would have kept on working with her if we didn't think. I didn't think. The field was volatile. And the editorial office needed to change every 5 years. No, I think it's probably more accurate to say it's close to death. But I felt the life of science depended on change. And the life of science depended on change that recognized where the energy was. And by energy, not only the place, but the people. Well, the field was getting deeper. I'm not sure there's any particular set of ideas. I just knew how much energy there was out there. I had seen, forgive the expression, looking at the patriarchy. I had seen people clinging on too long. And I was also, it was time for me to leave Barnard, and it was rational, a rational sense of what it was like to do this. And it was also an intuitive sense that if we didn't move, if it didn't move geographically and with people, I mean, Carla, I thought you and Suzanne just did a wonderful job setting up the advisory board with you chairing a new structure. I mean, that wouldn't have happened if I was now 103 and still editing it. I mean, and also, I've just thought of this right now. Never underestimate the ambition of women. It was the people who sought to be editor. There was, I think Stanford, quite frankly, thought that we weren't doing everything right, but they were ambitious to do it. There's nothing wrong with ambition as long as you're not totalitarian about it. I want to go back autobiographically. It became clear to me at a certain point I would not be a college president. I remember I was playing ping pong with my brother, and we were in our 20s. We were playing ping pong in our mother's basement. He said, "You're going to be a college president?" I said, "I don't think so." Temperament. I mean, I love being on boards, but I hate reporting to boards. And if I had a board, I'd be very careful about hiring me because you never know who you're going to get. I mean, are you going to get the girl from Bellingham, Washington, the little maverick Westerner? Or are you going to get the girl from Bellingham, Washington, whose mother made her mind her manners and it was polished up at Bryn Mawr? I mean, which one are you going to get? And sometimes, the woman who walks in the room slaps a man on the back, the woman who walks into a room looking severe and serious and what have you. So it seemed to me that I was not temperamentally, I was too restless. And though I know superb college presidents, just superb, and I respect them. And there also was, of course, my lesbianism. I was just a little too early. I entered into a couple of searches. The word came back from one search in a liberal, well, who else is going to live in the president's house? It was just, yes, I have members of my generation who stayed in the closet. But after I met Liz, I couldn't stay in the closet. And so I was just a half generation too early. And perhaps there are colleges that have been spared. I love being on college. I love colleges and universities. And that's the first thing. I love them. Something I carry with me from place to place is there's a big pin that says no whining. But anyway, the future, Carla, my friend, the future. Signs must remain a source of reliability. You know, every prediction of the future is based in your sense of the past, of present, but sometimes the past. But with AI, living in the age of disinformation, which is the name of our age, I think, there has to be a place that is trustworthy.
Yes.
Colleges and universities have to be the institutions, and science has to be the journal. Here's a section called Feminist Fictions. That's opinion. But here's our research. Here's how you can test us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think science has to cling to we are reliable. You can trust us. You might disagree with us, but we do try to think through to some kind of realities. And if those realities are going to change, we're going to say how they've changed. And that, I think, is just crucial. I think we have to worry, science has to wonder what it's going to do with visual culture. How much learning is now going to be increasingly visual. Again, I welcomed changing the cover. But how much of, I love graphic novels. I love graphic novels, but are we going to start footnoting graphic novels? There is a kind of reasoning that is slow and cautious. But it is, I agree with you, and it's also linked to something you and I care about, which is the humanities and what is happening. The institutional desiccation of the humanities. Forced. I mean, when you look, I mean, University of West Virginia, just shame on you. Well, it was true. It was true, and it was inventive, and it gave us great concepts. Intersectionality in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
What are going to be the concepts that will replace intersectionality, or at least make sure that we think of intersectionality as broadly as we ought to be thinking of it? You've got to think more about religion.
Mm-hmm.
I do think we're caught in the iron triangle of race, class, gender. We have to fight. I mean, the cruelty to transgender is one of the cruelties of my lifetime. But how can we recognize the multiple strands of identity? I think how expansive can intersectionality become? When we talk about intersectionality, what is it that we are talking about? I would see us do a little bit more of the kind of work that Jacqueline Rose is doing. Why are men so crazy? What really is the psychology of patriarchy? What is this crazy need for strength? I mean, I believe in strength. I want, you're strong, but what is this crazy need for domination? One of my fears, which I hope science will continue to investigate, is with climate change, that I think part of the impulse towards authoritarianism is the desperate fear of climate change that people cannot express. And then that leads to, it's always been a constant interrogation of science, which is the sources and nature of inequalities. So those are some of the issues that I think I hope science, power, back to, not to the drawing board, because too much great work has been done on the patriarchal power. What is I can understand why a man would want to have patriarchal power. You know, but why? Why? I mean, our species, if you look at the insects and the birds, they don't seem to be consumed by patriarchal power. I think it helps to institutionalize the field. It has to be stable. Otherwise, the people doing the work who may suffer the terrible burdens of contingent faculty. So there has to be a stable core. And that's called programs, departments, and what have you. But let us look at the history of the PhD and always, I say this as a graduate dean, and always remind ourselves of what you have to be careful of when you, of doctoral training, being unable to leave your past behind you. And also women, gender, and sexuality is, the two of you correct me here if I'm wrong. It starts with women. Gender gets added about 1986, and sexuality gets added in the 90s. And then queer studies, of course, are inseparable from sexuality studies.
Right.
There was the terrible, the continuing, and I think rather idiotic conflict about transgender. And congratulations again. I just thought, the Kitty's analysis of transgender law, well, what a brilliant piece of work. And so I don't know if the name will change in the future. Yeah. It very well might. It very well might. I don't know. I can't predict this. It depends on who goes into the field. Besides, we're going to have to spend so much political energy defending it anyway. I see the battle against, so I think we're going to have to do just an awful lot of defense. So it's perhaps a little utopian to think, what's the next name going to be when we're going to have to knock ourselves out defending the current name with all that the current name represents and all that the current name signifies. But that said, the defense of the work we're doing has to be inseparable from the defense of intellectual institutions, libraries, museums, colleges, and universities, which should be working together, for heaven's sake. We know the moment we're in now.
Yeah.
And so I love sports, so we have to play defense now. And so I can see the things that I think are going to have to be the subjects of the future. I don't know what those wonderful women at the University of Florida did to keep from gender studies being in that Senate bill that knocked out critical race theory. I don't know what they did. So the next few years are just going to have to be defense. But what are our hopes? What are our utopian visions? I mean, Sally Kitch's work on utopia is really terrific. But what is it we wish to accomplish? We have to animate our warrior spirit. What is the future we wish to bring into being? I will not see it, but what is the future I would like to bring into being? And what are our hopes? Because those early days, despite the grumbling and as I said, the infighting and the carrying on, and there's much carrying on, but there was this great sense of possibility. And I think that's part of one thing we have to fight against. The future seemed more open. Now the future seems a bit more closed, in part because of the inability to understand the threat of climate change, the defensiveness against climate change, because of the yet to be explained attraction of authoritarianism, despite all the books about it. I mean, you look around, there's China, there's Putin killing the Ukrainians, the bastard. Where is freedom? I mean, the feminism, despite everything, was always a democratic movement because it believed in the liberation from constricting gender roles. It believed in the liberation from patriarchy. That sense of our utopianism is justice, love,
Mhm.
equality,
Mhm.
care for children.
Mhm.
That's our utopia. And that's what we have to work for.
Mhm.
And at the same time that we work for reason
Mhm.
and truth. We do not live by lies. Lies suffocate us. Fiction doesn't. Novels don't, graphic novels. But we know the difference.
Mhm.
And that, I think, again, Mesa Hines lived to be 150 because of its commitment to reliability and trustworthiness and the sense of imagination that the intellect can bring us.